raw, uncut, and unapologetic. Welcome to Men Talking Mindfulness with your hosts John McCaskill and Will Schneider. Here we focus on helping men and those with men in their lives solve some of life's complex challenges through understanding the practices of mindfulness and how they can help. Each episode is in an environment free of judgment and criticism, with a focus on authenticity and inner peace. Let's dig in.
Pleasure doesn't need to start in the bedroom. Honestly, it really needs to start outside of it. It must be realized within ourselves. It must be realized within ourselves, because once it is, we can find and feel pleasure just about anywhere in our lives. Unfortunately, when I work with someone who struggles with finding joy and fun and play in life, I see that affecting their sex lives as well. And when you're unhappy and just going through the motions, we disembody, just like that tired mom at bedtime. Sadly, that's where I see a lot of moms today. They're disconnected and dissatisfied emotionally and sexually in their marriage. Initially, they married their partner out of some sort of attraction, but ultimately, they sought out matrimony for stability. What I'm seeing is that women in their late 30s and mid 40s are having a hard time seeing their stable partners as sexy. And because they don't see themselves as sexy either, it's a recipe for infrequent sexual encounters. This is a quote from the book that we'll be focusing on today, entitled "Not Tonight, Honey: Why Women Actually Do Want Sex and What We Can Do About It." Today, we are joined by the author of this important book, Courtney Boyer. You might remember Courtney. She joined our show a few seasons back where we discussed sex and mindfulness. We are thrilled to have Courtney here back again. And Courtney is a very successful coach, helping those she works with to live happier and healthier and more fulfilling lives. She's also a mother of three, a speaker, running enthusiast, and now an author. Congratulations, Courtney. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Will. Thanks, John.
You're welcome. And John, great to see you.
Too, brother.
We are on the second episode of season 8 of Men Talking Mindfulness, and it just keeps getting better. How are you, and what do you have for us?
Yeah, well, man, I'm great, and it's always a pleasure to have Courtney on the show. I know we have lively conversations when we got Courtney on here. And just to clarify, the name of the book is Why Women Actually Don't Want Sex. And what we can do about it.
Shit.
Yeah.
I was just thinking, I was being positive, all right? Like, 'cause I want women to have sex. Okay, anyway, sorry. Okay.
Same.
Sorry, Courtney.
But maybe after this show and some of the recommendations that we make to our female listeners and to our male listeners, that's why I have it, why it's important for women and men to understand women's sexuality and the struggles. This book, it was originally written for women, but I read it as a man and I got a lot out of it, and we'll get more into that here shortly. But for some announcements real quick, I know we've talked about our merch store. It's open. It's mentalkingmindfulness.com/shop. We've got all the stuff on there: shirts, hats, coffee mugs. And Courtney, I think we'll be sending you a shirt after this episode out there to Europe. I think you'll be one of our first European guests that receives a shirt. So hopefully you'll sport it and help to get
I will, proudly.
Right on. And then we have a retreat, and you can sign up for that retreat. It's May 16th through the 19th at the Glen Erie Castle here in Colorado Springs. It is our Be Well to Lead Well retreat, and if you want to take that deeper dive into the intersection between mindfulness and wellness and leadership, because there is one, you may not think it, there is one, but you got to be well to lead well, and then you got to lead well to be well. So lead yourself to be well. So that kind of the flip side of that too. But hey, if you're interested, check out mentalkingmindfulness.com/retreat, or you can simply text Be Well. That's BWELL, BWELL to 33777. And then lastly, subscribe to all our different social media platforms: TikTok, Instagram, YouTube. We're out there. We're putting stuff out there, and we'd love to have you guys as subscribers. All right, that's enough of that. Let's get into our opening practice. So we're just going to keep it short so we can really get into this content here with Courtney and really help you guys in the bedroom and otherwise, and how it's all tied together. But let's just do a simple 5-breath practice, and just close your eyes if you feel comfortable and if it is safe to do so. Otherwise, just soften your gaze, and let's bring our attention to our breath first, noticing the rise and fall of our chest and belly with each breath. And then we'll begin by taking an intentional exhalation, Emptying your lungs, shrinking your belly and your chest, holding empty at the bottom. Deep breath in, into your belly, into your chest. Hold and release. That's one. Holding empty. Noticing that feeling of emptiness. Deep breath in, into your belly, into your chest. Hold and let it go. 2. Deep breath in. Hold and release. 3. 2 more. Deep breath in. Belly, chest. Hold. Let it go. 4. 1 more together. Deep breath in. Hold and release. And start to bring some movement back in, rolling your shoulders, maybe wiggling your fingers, wiggling your toes. And let's get into this conversation. There it is. Not tonight, honey.
Yeah, here we go. Yeah, women don't like sex. It's like, oh my God, it's so disheartening. Anyway, so yeah, as we laugh and giggle, right? I was thinking of like, where's a great place to start with this? And why don't we start right there? Why does there always seem to be some giggling or joke making or hushed tones when we're talking about sex?
Gosh, where do I begin with that? I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that sex is such a personal thing. At least it has been such a personal thing. There's so many like religious and just historical messaging that really wants to take sex and just like put it in a corner. Right. There's a lot of confusion when it comes to desire, arousal, a lot of things that feel out of control for a lot of people, and especially for people in authority, like, religious authority, for example, even political authority. And so it's easier to tame that, and it's easier to push that aside. And so then people don't learn how to have discourse around sexuality in a healthy way.
Mm-hmm. All right. So what then? Thank you for writing this book, and why this book? Like, why'd you take all this time to write this book?
It was a lot of time. John, you just published a book, so
mine's super short. Yours is much more in depth. Wow, it was mind blowing.
Great read,
for sure. Great read for men and women. Again,
for sure.
Thank you. So I think one of the things that I would hear, actually 2 things that I would hear whenever I would go and speak, or anytime I had a woman come into my office or via Zoom or whatever, the 2 common themes were, what's wrong with me and am I broken? And those were the 2 questions that I just kept hearing year after year after year, a lot of times with tears in their eyes. A lot of times they came to me because their husbands, quote, made them, like, you need to go, like, you need help. You're broken, go get fixed. Oh, wow. And I know that people seeking help, whether that's therapy or coaching or mentorship, that can feel really overwhelming and intimidating when it comes to sexuality. And so I wanted to give people a resource that felt accessible, that felt like, okay, I can read this in private, and maybe I can read it and like talk about it with a friend, but like the idea is not necessarily about my personal life. And I really wanted to have that kind of like impetus that really started to create conversation around women's sexuality.
Nice.
I was reading this. Sorry, John. I was reading this book at the airport, and I put it down, and with the cover up, and I got this weird look from a woman. I was like, she gave me a look like that dude is not getting laid or something. So, but anyway, I just thought like it was funny, and I read this in the subway, like, oh, poor guy. Or something. Anyway,
I got the same, and I lost the hardcover, and I was reading it on my Kindle on the airplane the other day, and I was like, oh, is the person next to me reading what I'm reading? I'm a little self-conscious, and which comes back to this whole thing about sex and how society views it. So let's in the book you mentioned sex being like a skill, not like a skill. It is a skill, right? And unlike other skills where baking, or for those who may work on cars, you learn how to work on a car by somebody else teaching you. But we're not taught how to have sex or even how to talk about it. And it's not modeled for anyone, right? Like you can't go on YouTube and type in how to have sex, right? And if you do,
well, you can. I just wouldn't recommend it.
I wouldn't recommend what it is you find. And for a lot of people, they view pornography as how to learn about sex, and unfortunately, men and women, that's where we think we can learn. But then in your book, I love your line. It says, watching porn to learn about sex is like watching NASCAR and thinking that's how you learn to drive a car. So can you talk about how sex is a skill and how we can learn to have better sex?
Yeah, I think that there's kind of this assumption that if you have genitals and you insert A into B, like it can't be that bad, right? But it really can be.
But yeah.
It really can be, right? And when the misinformation is really perpetuated by like the porn industry of just like ramming it in there like for a solid 3 minutes before everybody's like, squirting and, making lots of noises. Right. So then we develop these like complexes in a way, like, oh, that's how I should be responding. And then I'm not responding anyways. So what is really unfortunate is that because we don't even have the communication skills to understand what it is that feels good to our partner, we can't have conversations about how we can develop these skills. So it really starts with understanding what feels good to us and really understanding how our bodies work. And so then that's really how you learn. It's kind of like some parents are like, hey, you need to know how to change a tire and change the oil before you can drive a car. And I think that's a really great approach when it comes to sex. Like you really need to understand how your body responds to certain touches, the things that feel good, the things that don't feel good, things that you're maybe interested in, maybe not interested in, and being able to be confident to communicate that to partners. And that's something that we're just not taught. Like parents don't teach their kids the basic body part names, let alone how to communicate, how to touch those body parts in a good way.
Yeah, I just finished reading a book called No More Mr. Nice Guy. I'm forgetting the author, something Glover, and in the book, it's almost like the counter to your book, but also supportive. But it's more for men, and the reason I mean that is it talks about the same thing about self pleasure and learning what works for you, but as a man, and then communicating that to the woman, because as men, it's kind of embarrassing at times to talk about what we need. Again, we might see something in pornography and be like, oh well, I want this, I want that, but in actuality, a way to communicate it effectively without coming across as overly aggressive, I think that's important. But in reading your book, in the first few chapters, I initially felt, I was like, this isn't about sex at all. I thought it was going to be about what we should do in the bedroom, and it's actually more about what we should do outside of the bedroom. I mean, it's about society, it's about purity versus pop culture, mental and emotional challenges that women have with their bodies, their body image, and then dealing with the non-sexual aspects of relationships with partners. And then I realized, as I was reading that, I was like, well, all of this is related to sex. I mean, that again, that's the man in me saying, oh, well, this isn't about sex at all. but it obviously is. Can you talk about that at a kind of a high level, and then we're going to dive more into the details with more pointed questions here shortly. Can you talk about that? Sorry.
Yeah, I think yeah, absolutely. It's so easy for people to want to just focus, like sex is about like sex. But when it's really especially in a long-term committed relationship, it is so much bigger than the actual act of sex. Like you're dealing with how you interact, how you are treated, the level of respect, the level of appreciation, issues of resentment, betrayal, just kids, stress, aging parents, like all of these factors contribute to how we are, like the mental state that we're in that allows us to be prepared for sexual activity. And so also everybody comes to relationships with emotional baggage. Like we are like packed full. So some people do a really good job of unpacking that emotional baggage and really working on it, whether it's therapy, coaching, whatever. And other people just continue to stuff their shit into the suitcases, and they've got a lot. And that impacts how we show up sexually. That impacts our ability to give and to receive pleasure. And, you know, those things have to be taken into consideration when it comes to really examining our sex lives.
There you go. And you know, you go on further talking about, you know, the emotional baggage and how a lot of this stuff outside the bedroom affects us inside the bedroom. One of the examples that you mention is your daughter looking up at you and saying something to the effect of, I'm beautiful. And how that caught you off guard, and then you're like, oh my gosh, what if somebody heard her say that? Then you took a step back, and you're like, you know what, that's great that she thinks she's beautiful. And a lot of us as young kids, we do think highly of ourselves, and that's a great thing. And then you go on to an analogy, maybe it's a metaphor, I forget, but it's about Target. And you know, the Target store, if there were an entrance to Target and one was labeled for beautiful people and one was labeled for everybody else, which door would you walk through? So could you talk about how we view ourselves and how that changes over time, and then how that can affect how we show up in the bedroom?
Yeah, so the story about my daughter, I will never forget that. She was 3 years old, and she was in this cute little tutu dress holding her little stuffed animal, and we were walking to the car, and she just stopped and was like, Mommy, I'm beautiful. I was like, oh my gosh, what if somebody heard you? You know, like I didn't, because I was raised to be a good girl, and good girls are not proud. We are not boastful. We are very demure, and we kind of take compliments, like sort of, but deflect them. And we never say that we're beautiful. Never, ever. I mean, we all want to be considered beautiful, but we don't ever say it. And so for her to, I felt like I was like in this weird, like, you know, previous history of my own life, and then with her. And I was like, I hope you tell yourself that every day. And that for me felt like it was such a shift. And I get emotional thinking about it because like I've got my oldest two are girls and they're teenagers, and to see them still feel good about who they are, despite all of the like body changes and the skin changes and stuff, like, gosh, that makes me feel like I'm doing something right. And if they can walk out of adolescence, like feeling connected to who they are and feeling beautiful, whether or not that's how society defines beauty or just a beautiful person, gosh, like that's just something that so many people, especially if women of my generation and before, we just didn't have.
Right.
And I think that that's really what I talk about in the book of, it was the Dove commercials where these women would be stuck and be like, I don't know which door to go through. And when women were in groups, especially with women that they were related to, they would pull them, their mom or their daughters through those doors. And they'd be like, hell yes, you're beautiful. Of course you're walking through that. But then when they were by themselves, a lot of them would not walk through the beautiful door.
Yeah.
And I just found that so, I mean, even still just thinking about that, like, would my daughters walk through the beautiful door? And that is just, gosh, like we just are not raised in a way where we feel good about our bodies, where our bodies are celebrated. The pleasure that our bodies bring is celebrated. So often I remember as a young girl, like my body was criticized. It was shamed. The idea of you're showing too much skin. What kind of message is that sending? Like I can't help the way like you're getting too pretty, or like, oh, you're not pretty enough, you're not going to find a man, you know, just those kind of messaging. And I feel like it's switched. It's not as emphasized as much. Like I don't talk to my daughters that way. I know my girlfriends don't talk to their daughters that way. But yeah, it's definitely something that the target audience of, my book has faced.
Yeah, nice.
Well,
Real
go
quick,
a little further.
Real quick, Will. Just a second, Will.
Sorry. Yeah, John.
We got a comment here, and this is for you, Courtney.
Oh.
It says, with a mother like you, your daughters will walk through the beautiful door. So there you go.
Oh, nice. That's so sweet. Thank you.
Go ahead, Will.
Well, my favorite now, whoever that was.
Yeah. Well, go a little further into that shame. Like, what does it do to a woman? And then, you kind of alluded to some of the things and how the behaviors and the kind of thinking and self-sabotage that shaming brings, but go a little deeper into more of that destructive nature of shame and around sex and sexuality and, just being like a sensual woman, if you will, or a sensual person.
Oh, no, that doesn't exist. At least it didn't exist when I was growing up. Sex was something that, especially I grew up in a very evangelical, conservative Christian culture and had the whole purity culture movement. And so sex was not ever discussed. It was something that was completely saved for marriage. And then you were supposed to flip a switch and be like, great, sex is great now. And everything is wonderful. And that was not the case for a lot of women. And it has not been the case for a lot of the women that I've worked with. But yeah, so you're raised to really deny any kind of sexual desire, any type of sexual pleasure. Your body, as it grows into like this adult, as a teenager, you have breasts and wide hips and God, you look like you're a young woman because you are. And that is shunned and that is considered a temptation. And so then you shut that down. You shut it down, you disconnect from it because it's the only way to really survive it historically in this culture. And then you're expected to just suddenly turn that back on. And what so many people don't realize is that shame's still there. It's still buried within us. Yeah. And they don't know how to extract it. And so that's what a lot of the work I do is.
Well, it cuts really deep. I mean, you even talk about not just the messaging from parents, from school, from other siblings or other people in your family, but even in the Bible, you quote in the book Matthew 5:30, is like you cannot trust the body. I mean, what a fucking statement, right? Here, I'll keep going. You can't trust the body; it will lead you astray. And if your right arm causes you to stumble, cut it off and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one part of your body than your whole body, than for your whole body to go to hell, right? And it's like, you mentioned a lot in which I'm so happy you have, and one thing that we continually try to get men to do and understand, and on our retreats and all the work that we do with different organizations, it's like really embodying our experience and really coming back to the body. You even mentioned later in the book about working from the bottom up instead of always it being kind of reprogramming the brain in order to change your body. So, how do women and anybody really kind of get back to that embodiment? And like, especially around sex, like sex is like the ultimate experience if you're willing to go there and open and be free and explore of like the physical experience. So can you kind of jump in there a little bit and talk about embodiment or what kind of that, that disassociation with our body first, and then how do we kind of find ourselves back home?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, really a lot of people, especially if they've experienced sexual trauma, sexual abuse, will disconnect because it's a survival technique. And so one of the things is that you really have to, if you want to connect with yourself, and then which allows you to finally connect with another person. That's the thing that I think people forget, is that when I disconnect from myself, I'm also disconnecting from my partner. And that makes it really hard to be like vulnerable and establish trust and really connect. And I think that that's something that people kind of forget about sex, is like, yep, sure, it's a way to like get off and have a good time, but it's also a way of connecting. It's also a way of healing. It's a way of transforming. Like there are so many powerful things that sex can do and can be, and yet we've really just narrowed it down to this small little thing that people focus on. Mm-hmm. But when we get back in our bodies, it allows us to really experience life. You made the comment earlier about like being a sensual woman, and that's really what I want for people to do when they are embodied is they have all of their senses activated so they can fully go through life conscious, present, mindful, whether that's in the bedroom or outside of it.
Yeah.
And kind of building off of that, you talk about the different languages that our body speaks versus our brain, what our brain speaks. And when we ignore our body's language, it's like fighting with one arm behind our back. Can you talk about how the body and the brain, how they speak different languages?
Yes. So if you've ever been anxious or in a like panic mode, and you're just like try to tell your body to calm down, does it listen?
No.
No, because our body does not speak the cognitive language of the brain. Our body speaks in breath, which I love the beginning of your guys' show. It's because of that, right? We're connecting with our breath. Our bodies understand movement, like exercising, running, shaking. It understands vibration, music. That's one of the things I find interesting about like the electronic dance movement or electronic EDM. Thank you. EDM. What I find is like, because they're so in tune with their body. I mean, they can be, sometimes they're on drugs, but but like, right? Like they're so in tune to how the music moves them. They allow it to move through them. So music, movement, breath, those are all ways that the body understands. It doesn't understand your language. So telling it to stop or to calm down or to get pumped up, it's not going to work. It doesn't speak that language.
Yeah,
that was awesome. I love that you brought that in, and then the different energies, the energy that we have in our body, and the chakras. Can you talk a little bit about the energy of the body and the chakras and how we can what they are, first of all, and then how we can open up those. I think you refer to them as roundabouts, basically in traffic, and how they can how we can get caught up in those roundabouts.
Yeah, I try to not get like too. My coach was like, Courtney, try to like get like more. And it's interesting because I'm very academic based, but I'm a big fan of the woo, and I think that there is such value and beauty in the esoteric and really things that we just can't explain. And so understanding like the energetics of sexuality is super fascinating. So a very quick overview. I was trained in a certain yoga method for Reiki, which is a type of Japanese healing. And in it sees the body that has 7 chakras. And essentially they run along the spine, not actually on the spine, but like parallel to the spine. And I like to think of it like a highway from like your base all the way to the crown of your head. And sometimes when you have this highway, there's 7 stops. Like your root, your sacral, which is like your womb space. That's usually the area that I tend to focus on, all the way up to your crown. And sometimes the energy can get stuck in there. Think of it like an accident, like there's a traffic jam, or sometimes there's a major pileup. And so
all I can think about is my kids' school drop off. They just put in a roundabout, and they're like, "Oh, this is going to solve everything," and it doesn't. It's so much worse. Sorry, I digress.
Yes, it's okay. It's okay. And so what happens is that one part affects the other parts. And because we get a backup and a buildup and stuff, and when all the things are flowing nicely, traffic moves smoothly. But then when parts of us get stuck. So for example, if we've had a sexual trauma, then it's like having a major accident in our sacral chakra. And so that impacts a lot of that area. It can lead to a lot of pelvic floor and pelvic disorders. Amongst other things, that part of the body also affects our creativity, our passion. So a lot of times what I see is that clients who are struggling professionally are also struggling sexually because they don't have that creativity flowing, that drive, that excitement, that desire inside or outside the bedroom.
And you said the sacral chakra is the chakra that has to do with giving birth, literally and metaphorically. And so like giving birth to something with creation. So, men can be affected there too.
Absolutely.
And they're not creating something, they're not tapping into their creative energies. And I love that you brought that piece in. Well,
that's why the yoga practice is so good. for anybody, anytime during their lives, because it not only because when we start to let go of the physical and therefore the emotional stress that's held within the body. I mean, because it's so, it's like, coming back to like the brain and the body, right? The brain, again, it cannot effectively communicate with the body, but the body can very effectively communicate with the brain. And actually we can get messages from the body. But in order to kind of get to that embodied experience, we got to get in our body. And what's so nice and about the yoga practice, it's like a very holistic practice in the sense it's like working from the feet all the way to your head and all the extremities in between, even your organs and the twisting and everything that's going on. And you can if that's one thing that anybody that's out there that is kind of struggling sexually or just like can't kind of get over some sort of like inner like obstacle, that could be a great place to just go and play, right? And also discover more of your body. And it could be also, it's quite a sensual experience in the sense of like, I'm feeling my body, I'm with my breath, there's other people around, like, and it really has created a tremendous, like more, it's just tapped me more into my intuition. It's just like I'm always in this creative realm even more because my body and these chakras you talk about, like they get stuck like anything else sometimes, and sometimes they could be stuck for decades. And this is a way to help unwind, get the energy flowing back into those wheels, those roundabouts, and therefore you can really just be yourself, right? And that's what we're really trying to do here. Is kind of get back to the self or not even get back to it. Yes, get back to it, but then understand what the self is, and who I can really
Absolutely.
be. Yeah. Where do you want to go next, John? I want to go into. I definitely want to talk about the 3 big lies about women and sex. I think that maybe we'll go there, and then we can kind of come back to maybe healing, or kind of like getting back into our body and kind of having better sex because we're being better with ourselves. So anyway,
go for it.
So let's talk about those 3 lies, if you will. Yeah. And I can read them if you want. Or how about we do that? I'll read the first.
Please do. I don't have off the top of my head.
You don't have your own book? Like what the hell's going on?
You don't have your book memorized? What the heck?
I know. Right? All right. Here we go. Okay. All right. Lie number 1. It's my duty as a wife to please my husband. I see nothing wrong. Okay, it's my duty as a wife to please my husband.
Will, jeez.
I was gonna lie.
I'm sorry. I didn't. That was like my first initial very macho response. Okay, I was going toxic masculine for a second. Yeah. It's my duty as a wife to please my husband. There's a part B to this too. My husband deserves access to my body whenever he wants it. That's the first lie. Let's dive in there and talk about that, please.
Yes. Again, growing up religiously, I cannot tell you how many times I was told that in some overt or covert way. But yes, essentially, like you have a wifely duty to perform. There's an assumption that men want sex all the time, and women obviously don't. So your job is to perform on demand. And so that's obviously not for a variety of reasons. I've known people who the woman has the higher sex drive, in a heterosexual marriage, and they, that's another topic. And then the second part of it I see a lot is I've had clients that really are bothered when their husband, like they'll be doing the dishes and their husband will come up behind them and essentially grope them. And that to them is like, oh, I'm just like showing you my affection for you. And like, that is fun for me. And the wife just feels like violated, but she's really just supposed to take it because that's her husband. He has access to my body whenever he wants it. So what am I supposed to do?
I saw, obviously I read that piece. And what I thought about is on Instagram, you'll see these reels where that's what's shown. You'll see a husband coming up and spanking his wife on the butt while she's doing the dishes or whatever. And I've gone in and I've read the comments, and it's really interesting. It's a lot of the comments are, oh, this is so cute. I love to see this type of playfulness in a relationship. I hope that there's fire in my relationship like this or that kind of stuff. And I've always thought it was interesting to see those types of comments, and most of them are from women. But then reading your part is that a lot of women don't respond well to that. I know, honestly, if I walked up on my wife and I spanked her on her butt when she was doing the dishes, man, there'd be all hell to pay. That was just a comment, not so much for you to respond
dissect.
to. But
I will not, John. I will not. Consent matters. I will not dissect that without your consent.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, I just yeah. Go ahead. I'm sorry, Courtney. Yeah.
Oh no, that's okay. I was just going to say, I mean, joking about consent, but like, I think that really goes back to the temperature of your relationship and the dynamics of your relationship. And so if you are in a relationship where that's pretty normal, like we're very playful, we're very touchy, it's been established that I'm okay with that. Like I've had a conversation with you and said, I like it when you come up behind me. I like it when you speak. I like it when you like grab me and kiss me in the kitchen. But a lot of couples are not having that kind of conversation. And in fact, what's happening is that there's this sense of resentment of like, I'm freaking in here doing the dishes after I cooked dinner for everybody. I've been at home all day. And now you come in and you want to get your feels worth.
Yeah. That's what I always think when my wife walks in and grabs my junk. Oh my gosh, Becca's going to kill me for this episode.
Yeah, that's awesome. Sounds like a healthy relationship. I'm just kidding, John. I'm just kidding.
Well, all right, Will, I'll stop.
No.
Turn it back over to you for
All
the
good.
second
All right,
of the lies.
Here is lie number 2. Masturbation is wrong and shameful. Yeah, jump in that. You say also self-stimulation. Why? Because masturbation, the word, can conjure up images and feelings of sin and shame. So let's talk about masturbation.
Yes. So masturbation, self-stimulation, whatever you want to call it, it in a lot of families and religions, it is sinful and shameful. And so that has been something that, because a lot of times people associate masturbation with pornography or masturbation with lusting. And they're not mutually exclusive. Like, do a lot of people utilize porn and lust after other people or desire other people, right, without their consent? Yes. But I think you can still be a devout person of faith in a very, conservative, sexually narrow religion and still masturbate and not think about other things. You can really just tune into the sensations of your body. And I think that that's something that people don't realize, but is obvious.
Yeah, I if I could tell a story and, about, I was like 14, 15, exploring my sexuality, trying to get to second base and third base, you know what I'm saying? And
I don't know what you're saying. Please explain.
Yeah, exactly.
I need you to be more specific.
Well, John, we'll talk offline, John. Okay.
I've got 3 kids, man.
I know. I was going to say I have 3 kids. I don't understand. Anyway.
How's this keep happening?
Yeah. Here's what we are giggling again, right? So, so I remember I was like, my parents were leaving the house, and I kept asking them, when are you coming back? When are you coming back? Because I was having a girl come over as soon as they left. So this girl comes over, and my parents are really caught on to, I guess I asked way too many times when they're coming back, so they knew some shit was going down. So they came back to the house probably within like 45 minutes or an hour, and I kicked this girl out the back door. They never saw her. It was the timing was perfect. They came in the front door. I'm sending her out the back. Right, nothing happened. I was super shy. I was hoping something would happen, but anyway, my parents kind of effed it up. So my dad then sits, and they knew something happened in the house, right? And they sit me down and in the living room, and I'm like, all right, I'm going to get the sex talk. Here we go. Birds and bees. Like, talk to me. But we never had this conversation. And my dad looks at me in the face, and he's like, it's a sin to spread your seed. And I was like, what? What the fuck are you talking about? I'm thinking in my head, I remember this moment. I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, this is what he's saying to me right now? And therefore I get that shame. It's like, you should not be masturbating. He didn't even use the word masturbation. Like, he didn't, just like a lot of people in our parents' generation just didn't have the capacity or, the ability to kind of communicate sex healthy in a way to, a young, very ambitious child, so that's where it came for me, as far as like masturbation. And kind of the shame that was wrapped around it. I mean, it's not like that, but yeah. I mean, it's weird how it just runs so deep in our society, and comes from a lot of that Puritan culture, and the Bible and Christians and Catholicism and a lot of other religions. Like, they really, try to, keep this act very sacred. I also feel that, a lot of, the Bible is written by all men and men are always trying to kind of protect the womb and protect their women. And I think that's where a lot of this kind of shaming comes from, because they just kind of want to, I don't know, men want to save all the women for themselves or something. Yeah, anyway, sorry if I rambled there a little bit, but any comments, or we can go to number 3? Should we go to number 3?
Let's go with number 3. She's shaking her head.
Yeah, okay. Sorry. Yeah. Okay. Sorry. Lie number 3. Previous sexual experiences outside of a marriage are wrong and will impede your married sex life. There you go.
Yes. I remember a woman, I spoke at a women's group one time, and she said, I had a previous sexual partner and my husband was had not had sex before we got married. And I feel like that's like a bad thing, but I think it's also helping me. So she felt very torn, like that her experience. And that's another message of that fear message. Like if you give that part of yourself away, then you will be less valuable to your future spouse. Like I talk about this in the book, like I had sex ed in high school, and it was a teacher held up a piece of paper and said, anybody that you have sex with, and she ripped the paper. And then if you have another partner, and ripped that paper. And so at the end, there was like this teeny tiny little scrap, and it was like, this is all your future spouse is getting from you. And so much fear around, I can't be that kind of wife. I have to like give everything. And so the idea of having, again, I'm not saying to go hoe around. I mean, unless you want to do that, like, that's fine. I really don't care what you do. Just make good choices. Do it from a place of empowerment, people. But like, just so much fear in the messaging, and it just isn't true. It's just not true.
Yeah. I gotta jump on that, because I am Christian, and I know that some of our listeners are Christian, and I want to know, how do you communicate purity to your children, to anyone else within the church, without damaging their future sex life? And or for those who do save themselves for marriage, how can they have a healthy and pleasurable sex life as virgins, day one, for both of them?
Okay. So one, I still identify as Christian. Sorry, we used a trigger word of mine, John. And so I actually talk about this in the book, is the word pure.
Yeah.
I hate that word, because to me, the idea that kids are pure until they're sexually active, like there's that ingrained belief that sexual activity corrupts, and that suddenly now you are unpure, and you can't become pure again once you become sullied or unpure.
Yeah.
Let me just say, even though there are things in the book that I talk about that are very, I'd say a little bit more progressive in some of the things that I suggest, I still very much honor people who want to abstain before marriage, people who want to tell their kids to abstain before marriage. That is not my job to judge them. I am very much in a place where I am happy to equip you with the knowledge. My biggest takeaway that I hope that parents get who identify as Christian and want their kids to abstain before marriage is communicate why you want them to abstain from a place of love and not fear. If you can effectively do that.
Yeah. Can you?
If you can, it's tough.
Yeah.
But
I was going to say,
can.
well, I mean, right. I mean, you're really talking to a higher source then, instead of like, because it's like all about like serving God in that case, right? And like serving, and kind of living up to this very high, very almost unattainable standard. When we have oh my God, I mean, just think about our experience when we start to get our hormones in our body, and we start, like, my experience, masturbating like crazy, because it's just like, that's what I want to do, because like my body is lit up with all this testosterone, and now I'm experiencing life in a new way. I mean, I guess it just, is it like I wish, I don't even know what that conversation might sound like, to really like do it in a very life affirming, positive way, when you're kind of also denying at the same time your body's biological need, which is so incredibly strong. I mean, it still is for me. So I don't know. I just wanted to put that out there too, because it sounds like, you can't have both, in some ways, you know what I mean? So
it's a tough, yeah. I mean, again, like that's not, again, I identify as Christian. I am not raising my kids with that message that you have to wait to have sex until you get married. Mm-hmm. But I work with parents who do want to communicate that to their kids. So my job is to equip them with medically accurate, age-appropriate information, so that they can then convey it from their belief perspective. Right. I mean, the reality is like 90% of Americans have sex before they get married. Mm-hmm. And like, we know that the rate of marriage continues to like delay. So now we're talking late 20s. Like, I mean, I got married at 22, and a lot of the people that I knew got married young because we grew up in a culture where you couldn't have sex before marriage. Right. And to be honest, a lot of them are getting divorced now.
Yeah. I mean, almost like in that case, you're almost like using the accomplishment of marriage just to have sex, instead of like, maybe you would wait a little bit longer, discover yourself a little bit more if you actually had sex before marriage,
Yes, so, sex definitely is elevated, but again, there's a lot of lack of education and a lot of shame. Sex is very powerful. Very powerful. And so people like to control that. And if they can control sexual behavior, then they feel like they can control the individual.
Yeah, that's a whole nother thing too. My God.
Sure is.
Yeah, I know. Right. God, so much tied into sex.
Yeah. Let's kind of shift the topic. So we cover all three lies there. But I also want to talk about how society packages pleasure. And you covered three different ways for how society packages pleasure, and how it can be a mistake. And the one is that pleasure is not for me, it's for you, which is the human giver syndrome, is what you called it. Mm-hmm. And then pleasure is a distraction, which is the good girl complex. And then it's not safe to pursue pleasure and desire, which is what you call the notebook dilemma from the movie The Notebook. Mm-hmm. Can you talk about those packagings of pleasure and how that affects sex?
Yes. Again, women especially, we receive so many messages about sex. And I'm speaking from like my generation. I know it's different in like my kids' generation, and even probably like the Gen Z, the early 20s people. But yeah, definitely, like there's just so much like, pleasure's good, but like, you don't get that. Like your job is to be, and even that's something that we definitely see in mainstream pornography, is like the male lens, the male gaze, is that it's not the same as like feminist based porn of like what women want to see and the type of things that bring women pleasure. And so it's this idea that women basically are here to serve and please men. And so that's kind of like that whole human giver syndrome. Like, I'm here to please and to give to you. Right. And that's, a lot of religions will reinforce that. Like, you're the helpmate. Like, you are here to help, not be helped. Mm-hmm. And then like, the good girl, this is something that I went to a Christian high school and really experienced firsthand of like, well, like a good girl wouldn't do that. Like, like I was the epitome of the good girl in high school. I was a straight A student. I was a varsity athlete. I went to church 3 times a week. Like, I was all in it. And, good girls don't get distracted and like almost like dabble within this like pleasure thing, because really it's a distraction from like this higher work and the good things that you're supposed to be doing in the world.
Yeah. And then boys don't receive that same message. Like, I went to a Catholic high school for a couple of years. I mean, 5th and 6th grade. And like, no, not at all. I mean, it's just like, well, yeah, keep going.
And then the notebook syndrome. Can you touch on that one too?
Oh yeah, this idea of like, it's like this stability, like safety stability dichotomy of like, I want this the excitement and desire of, Noah, and there's something that I can't have, but then I think Juan is the other guy, but like this other guy provides me this like safety and stability, and like I can't have both. So it's like it's one or the other.
Yeah. Now talking about that and what we just talked about, Will, you mentioned that men or boys are not taught the same messaging. And I think it's important that men listen to this. I mean, the show is called Men Talking Mindfulness, and the preponderance of our audience is men. Mm-hmm. And I want men to listen to this episode, and I want men to read your book. But that said, in the book, you mentioned dissatisfied wives coming to husbands with their concerns and the men not wanting to change. And then you also mentioned that a lot of women say they don't want to have sex with him, or that they find their husbands boring. And then you have, within the book, you have quotes like, the message again from the patriarchy is that you can't trust your body, and being selfish allows you to elevate your needs and desires and go after what you want. Men have been doing this for centuries, and I don't see anyone accusing them of being selfish. Now, as a man, how can a man read this book and see it as a book that's helpful to them as well as the women, and not a book that blames men for the way things are, or isn't a man-bashing book? And yes, I wrote that whole question out because I wanted to make sure I said it in a way that didn't come across as combative.
Let's go, Courtney.
Come on, John. No. John could take me in like 2 seconds, okay? Like, I know I'm fully aware of my skills and tools. No, absolutely. Like, and I think that's even something that I touch on in the intro, I believe, or chapter 1 of, like, the goal of this book is not to point fingers, but it is important that we hold people accountable. And when we have millennia, right? Not just like a few years, but millennia where women have been property. We have been pawns. We have been like not full citizens, not full rights.
Sex slaves.
Controlled. Sex slaves. Like, we're even in parts of the world today, right? Even in parts of the world today, women's sexuality is regulated, controlled, traded, and so many things.
Wow.
And so I think that it's not about blame, it's about accountability and understanding the impact of the policies and behaviors of men historically and how that impacts us today. And that's really what I love. Men, like I do, like, they're amazing allies. I love talking to you guys before the show. I love your show. I love you both.
Thank you.
We love you too.
Thanks, guys. And so it's not about blaming, but it is about understanding the role that men have played in women's oppression, in our ability to advocate for what we need. Like, I see firsthand women who go to their husbands and say, I'm not happy. Like, I'm struggling in this marriage. And their answer is, you have a great life. Why are you complaining? I want help. Like, I have wives who say, can we please go to therapy? And their answer is, I don't have time. I don't want to do it. And it's funny because my husband and I talk about this a lot because, I think that what's happened is marriage has become such an unrealistic relationship in so many ways. And, people get married for one thing and they set up these unhealthy and unrealistic dynamics. And then 10 years in, a lot of times the woman's like, actually, I do want an emotionally available spouse.
Yeah.
I want somebody that can access their feelings. I want somebody that can tell me that they're struggling or that they're hurting or that they're sad, that they just lost their job or their mom just died. Like, I want that. And so then it's almost like the rules change. And then the man doesn't know what to do because he doesn't have those tools in his toolbox. And so he feels frustrated because you've never asked for these tools before. And now you want me to use them and I can't. And so I feel ashamed about that.
Right.
And so really, go ahead.
No, what happens? Okay, there's probably a man or many men out there listening right now that are in that situation where it's just like, why their spouse has come up to them and expressed these concerns, and they're just like dismissive. Like, how do we flip the script? How do we have a healthy relationship? How do we bring more sex back into the relationship? And I love what you say and you said it here. Sex is such an incredible means of communication and connection. And that can really help to reinvigorate the relationship if it's gone kind of a little sour or something. So what do we do in that situation if a man's like, oh, whatever?
We have to have the courage to have the conversation. Men have to have the courage to say, there's something that's missing and it could be me. What can I do to change? What do you need from me? But that's scary for a lot of people to ask, especially for men who like to be, I've got it all together. I don't need anybody. I don't need anything. I'm capable and competent in who I am. And you're coming to me after what I thought was like a relationship that was sort of functioning for 15 years. And now you're saying it's all wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah.
And so it's not about them saying it's all wrong. It's saying what's working or what's been working isn't working for me anymore. And that can be sexually or otherwise, but being brave enough to have that conversation and not take it personally.
Yeah, and that's tough to do is not.
Yeah, of course it's tough.
Right? Yeah. And, in your book, you use the term sexpectations.
I love that word.
I love that. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Because, I mean, that's what a lot of it boils down to is sexpectations.
Yeah, from the expert. Anyway, she definitely loves playing with this word.
I do. I love those fun words. I mean, so we have these expectations, and we kind of talked about it a little bit about like the husband coming up and like groping his wife while she does the dishes. Like there's expectations around how I behave sexually or what my husband or what my partner does sexually. And so we fail a lot of times to convey what those expectations are. Yeah. And then we get disappointed and frustrated and the resentment builds. And then, relationships dissolve because we never communicated our sexpectations. Sexpectations just are expectations around sex.
Yeah.
I didn't put those two together. I wasn't sure.
Just wanted to break it down for you, Will.
No. I mean, no. Thank you. And kind of like around this, like men and sex and communication. It's like it's that vulnerability that we keep trying to talk about and keep trying to invite men into in the show. And if you're able to just imagine if you hit that point in a relationship, and hopefully men are listening to this out there and be like, you know what? Okay, I'm just gonna get vulnerable and I'm really gonna communicate this. Like depending on the relationship, but like just to put yourself in that vulnerability, to put yourself out there, to kind of stand naked in front of your wife. Like you talk about a way of like becoming sexy again to one another. Like through vulnerability, because that's what really great sex requires is a sense of trust and vulnerability. And then you can kind of build everything from there. But it really comes back to that, to the willingness to have that conversation, but also before you get there, the willingness to be truthful, to be vulnerable, and really just open up and communicate in a very clear and, way around your expectations or what's getting in the way of us having more sex.
Well, I think one of the problems with that is that a lot of times people don't know what they want.
How do we get there? What do we do? How do we get? Yeah.
They do not give themselves permission. And I think John kind of alluded to this in how you were asking that question recently. But like we, a lot of times especially women have looked to authority for guidance and for direction. And so when we are looking up, we can't look within. And if we're not looking within, then we don't know how to follow our hearts because we don't know what our heart's desires are. And so if we want to really be in tune with our desires and the things that bring us pleasure, we have to give ourselves permission to look inside. And that can be really, really scary if you've never done that, or you think that you're not good and you do not deserve good things, and you see yourself in such a bad way. And a lot of men see themselves that way. And that just breaks my heart, but it is, they do.
Yeah, for sure.
Into me you see is one of the definitions I've heard of intimacy.
Oh, right. I like that.
Into me you see. Yeah, I was like, that was
Yeah.
years ago. So when I heard that, I'm like, oh, that's fucking actually, and now I'm using it in here.
There you go.
So, John, why don't you?
Yeah, I want to
Yeah.
build on that piece right there about
Yeah, go for
how
it,
we
yeah.
see ourselves, and you talk about, there's a part of your book where you're telling women to look in the mirror and see themselves as the little girl that they used to be, and this little girl who dreamed and laughed and sang and danced like it didn't matter, and this really hit home because I've got 2 young little girls. I've got a little boy as well. I mean, and it applies to him too. But can you run through that mirror exercise that you describe in the book, and then how important it is to see yourself a certain way and what that does for you in the bedroom?
Yeah. So I had a client once who was convinced that she loved herself. And the funny thing is, I will let you in on a little secret of how I know clients struggle with their self-worth, is their beliefs are reflected in their behaviors. Mm-hmm. So you can tell me all day long that you love yourself, but if you are overeating, overspending, numbing out, drinking, you don't love yourself. Like you're trying to escape and you're trying to numb the pain. So I told her, I said, okay, let's do a fun little exercise. And I said, I want you to see that mirror. I want you to go over to it. And I want you to look in the mirror. And I want you to say, I love you. She's like, okay, I can do it. No problem. So she walks over. She stares at herself for a solid 10 seconds. She starts to say, I, and then she just starts crying.
Yeah.
She couldn't do it. And I think what happens is there's that body connection, right? Because our bodies don't lie. The body is saying, you don't love us. And so it had a physical reaction. It had to release. It had to say, no, that's not your truth. You're not speaking that. And so a lot of times people don't realize how much they don't love themselves. Mm-hmm. And then they bring that self-loathing, self-hate, that disconnect to their partnership and to sex. And it affects their ability to be present, to receive pleasure. I see this especially with women when it comes to receiving oral sex. A lot of times women who struggle with body image issues, who struggle with a history of sexual shame, the idea of a man, or well, anybody, putting their mouth anywhere down there, right, is just like, that's awful. That's disgusting, right? It's like, why would anybody want to do that? I've had women ask me that. Why would anybody want to do that? And again, it's just that disconnect, that shame of my body's not lovable, I'm not lovable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the self-loathing, I mean, that carries itself everywhere. When Will and I were in Costa Rica, we went and did a psychedelic therapy retreat. And at the end, without the psychedelics, we looked at a partner and didn't see them as who they were, but saw them as somebody else in our lives. And Will, I may need your help here, but we looked at them in their eyes and we said, I am sorry. Please forgive me. Thank you. I love you.
I love you.
Yeah, and that's it. And we said it over.
Choked up, John.
We said it over and over. And I tell you, I was looking at that person and I was seeing myself and saying, I am sorry. Please forgive me. Thank you. I love you. To myself, I was bawling. And I realized, you know what? There's a part of me that does not love who I am. There's a part of me who actually does the exact opposite, whereas there's self-loathing going on. And now I've taken that lesson that I learned at that retreat, and I do that in the mirror, and I say, you know what? I am sorry. Please forgive me. Thank you, and I love you. And I tell you, that's one of the most powerful things that I do on the regular, and I still at times tear up. But man, mirror exercises, they can be incredibly helpful in changing how you literally and figuratively see yourself. So I don't know why I went down that path, but I just had to share that.
It's in the book, right? I mean, it's like, it's the whole, I didn't realize this Hawaiian ritual called Ho'oponopono.
Ho'oponopono.
Yep.
Ho'oponopono.
Ho'oponopono. Yeah. I'm sorry. Please forgive me. Thank you. I love you. Yeah.
Yeah. That was that definitely brought tears to my eyes, and then seeing it again in the book was awesome.
Why don't we wrap it up, John, with if you want. I'm sorry, John. I was thinking
I'd love to touch on the IFS piece.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So for the IFS, so we're talking about the self. We're talking about getting more deep and intimate and meaningful, and understanding, and then really experiencing. I'm sorry. Please forgive me. Thank you. I love you, and really speaking to the self. We had Frank Anderson on last season. Fucking love the guy. IFS is just the bomb. You talk about the 8 C's in the book, and he talked about it on the show. Also the 5 P's, which I really like. In order to really discover, be with, experience the self, get the self energy, get the self leadership is what they call. So and also the parts, I think, is really what the key here is, right? Part of it is understanding these parts instead of it being like, oh, I'm a bad person because I have this little person inside of me that's telling me all these bad things about myself. So let's finish with that as a way to kind of maybe heal and get back to the self. And because I think it's just so profound, this work. And I'm so glad it's done, spoken of in a Western way instead of the woo-woo esoteric kind of thing. So thanks for breaking this down for us.
Yeah, so IFS stands for Internal Family Systems, and it is, honestly, I as a trained therapist and didn't get exposed to IFS and think it's one of the most powerful modalities I have ever come across. Mm-hmm. And really, what you're doing, it's really like what John was saying, like you're connecting with that part of yourself that is hurting and in pain and just wants to be seen and loved. And I think that that's something that, a lot of people, when they come to me and they say, I'm not interested in sex, or I'm doing this behavior, or, if I have a couple that comes to me and, like she's always yelling at me and she's nagging, or he's always like escaping. It's really about honoring those parts and just trying to understand that those behaviors are a form of protection. They are trying to protect that little boy or girl inside of you that is hurting, that is struggling, and just does not want to feel pain. And so it's really about trying to get those parts to just relax and be like, okay, like this can be okay. Healing, it can be better, but like that requires trust and that requires action. And it's wonderful.
Yeah, I mean, and actually I recorded a little microdose one, not like a big micro, like a hero's dose kind of micro episode of know thyself, and I break down these 8 C's, and then I'll mention the P's, right? So it's like calm, curious, creative, courageous, connected, compassionate, and confident. Like just imagine, and clarity, or just imagine living with that on the inside. Like that's who you are, and then leading yourself in that way. But then, and then being in the world with the 5 P's is being present, being persistent, being playful, being patient, and being perspective, or having perspective. So, I mean, that's like, if you're out there and like, you're struggling with any kind of shame, sexual shame or whatever, it's like, getting the IFS or even calling Courtney, working with Courtney can really help you to kind of, get to know those parts. It's so important. That's why I like IFS. Instead of just, oh my God, am I a multi-personality, weird, like wacko person that should be in a padded room? Instead of just being like, oh wait, like, oh, this, what's so nice about the parts, it's like, this needs my attention. Let's see what's going on over there. And then have a conversation and communicate with this part, and then understand what it's trying to do. And then, and kind of unifying with that part and moving forward instead of like always being divided.
Well, and I think acknowledging too that like you can have 2 parts, that I have a part that really wants sex and I have a part that's afraid of it, or that is I'm ashamed of it, or and honoring both of them and knowing like it's okay to feel both of those things, and we can figure out a way to like, how do you want to feel about it? Like what is that emotion? What is that embodiment that when you come to sex, when you approach sex, like what does that look like and feel like for you? And really allowing those, 2, 3 parts to all feel present and heard.
Yeah. And if you got some trauma, if you've got some of the struggles that we've talked about on the show today, in or outside of the bedroom, definitely recommend checking out our episode with Dr. Frank Anderson. And it's all about transcending trauma and how the IFS can really be helpful there. It's actually one of the more powerful episodes we've ever done. I walked out of it just exhausted because of everything that I wanted to just jump right into IFS. But anyhow, Courtney, this has been an awesome episode. If you had one thing, one message that you wanted to leave with our watchers, our listeners, that would help them to feel better about their sexuality and sex, or anything else for that matter, what would it be?
My message would just like, you are worthy and deserving of pleasure. Like, I really hope that you believe that. And if you don't, I really want you to, because you deserve it. You are worthy and deserving of amazing things. And I hope that you incorporate a life that is filled with joy and filled with pleasure and love.
Awesome. Yeah. And what's the best way for listeners to find you?
Yeah, so I'm on social media at Courtney Boyer Coaching. So Instagram's great, LinkedIn. I'm the most interactive on Instagram. So like sending me, I love it when like podcast people send me a message of like, oh, I heard that makes my day. I love chatting and getting to know listeners, and I love talking and I love people. So
awesome. Well, we'll make sure those links to your website, to your social media are in the podcast notes. But Courtney, this has been fantastic. Will, I know you're going to wrap it up with the closing practice, but before we do the closing practice, I just want to say, hey, Courtney, thank you to our listeners. Thank you to our viewers. Thank you for tuning in. We sincerely appreciate you. And if you got something out of this episode, please share it with your friends, your family, your colleagues, whoever you feel could benefit. And then please give us a review, subscribe to the podcast, subscribe on social media. We really appreciate you, and we appreciate your subscribing and following, but not just for our own ego, but so that we can get this kind of goodness, our guests and their messages, like Courtney and her message, out to the masses, because it does make a difference. So, all right, now I'll get off my soapbox and turn it over.
No, thank you, John. That was beautiful. And hey, we're trying to create a healthier world, and that's why we have people like amazing people like Courtney on. And Courtney, I got to say, after reading through your book and hearing the way that you interact with and all the wonderful questions that you ask the clients as a kind of a way to kind of keep telling the story and keep talking about the problems and the solutions around sex. If you need help like this, reach out to Courtney. She's a coach. She can help you with this, and I know she would love to. And that's all about that. And let's just close with 3 breaths.
Wait, Will, can I just say something? I just want to.
Yes.
I just want to thank you guys for having me on again, and thank you for the work that you do. Anytime I have, especially male clients, I send them your guys' podcast, because I think the work that you're doing is so important. No, I'm serious. I do. It is so important. And I'm so proud to be associated in this space with you, and really thank you for being such a light. So keep
And it all started by looking up the word sexpert on LinkedIn, and you popped up.
No, I think it was sex expert, and then all of a sudden it's a sexpert or something like that. Remember?
Something like that.
Yeah, I remember. It was awesome. And hey, maybe we'll have a hat trick here one of these days. Again, Courtney, have you back for a 3rd time, which would be awesome. So we love having you here. All right, everybody, let's just close it with 3 easy breaths, a little parachute breath. We're just going to take a really a nice swift inhale through the nose, and a very, very, very almost 2 or 3 times long elongation of the exhale, and just let's just drop in and exhale out. Try to really get empty, and we'll take that really swift inhale through the nose, and exhale out the mouth really slow. Really slow. Control. Drop into the moment by finding your breath again. In. There we go. Exhale out. Slower. Relax the face, jaw, shoulders. So good. And one more of those. In. Awesome. Exhale out. And just close with taking a moment and thank yourself for listening. We thank you for being here. We thank you for even just wanting to live a better life, to have a healthier and happier sex life. because we can all create a better world by just getting a little bit more intimate with ourselves and other people that really are meaningful to us. So thank you guys. And that's it. That's a wrap, I guess.
Yeah.
That's it. All right.
Take care, everyone. Until next time. Peace.
Thank you, Courtney. Thank everybody. Bye.
Thank you for joining us today. We hope you walk away with some new tools and insights to guide you on your life journey. New episodes are being published every week, so please join us again for some meaningful discussion. For more information, please check out mentalkingmindfulness.com.